Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is John Harkins. I'm the Events Associate for the French American Chamber of Commerce New York chapter, and we are happy to welcome you to our session today, Unconscious Bias of Voice, a workshop on what the voice really means. Just a very quick word about our organization. The French American Chamber of Commerce's mission is to provide the opportunities, experiences, and understanding that empower successful business relationships between and for members. The FACC-New York chapter counts a mosaic of 1,000 members, representing sectors from tech to food, finance, and other professional services. These members have complimentary access to digital events featuring top industry experts and leaders, as well as personalized member-to-member introductions, access to the FACC member directory, and of course, we'll be able to connect with other member attendees of this webinar. This workshop today will last about 45 minutes or so. And since this is a workshop, we want to make this as interactive as possible. So if you have a question or an experience you'd like to share, throw it in the question box and we'll do our best to address it. Just a very quick word about our speaker today. Today we welcome Lisa Patti, founder of Accent-C3, to learn strategies to overcome bias, to become a better listener, and to communicate effectively in the new digital landscape. Lisa Patti has been working with international professionals, entrepreneurs, and students for more than 15 years, developing techniques to improve key aspects of communication while understanding the impact and perception of their voice. Lisa developed the C3 method, focused on communication of the message, clarity of speech, and bridging the gap of cultural communication differences. I won't keep us waiting any longer with my little chat. So Lisa, would you like to take it over?
Sure. Okay, so hello everyone. It's very nice to be here. We could go next. And since I had a very nice introduction, we could move through some of this. Next. And next. All right, so as John said, we're going to be learning about what the voice really says. So some of the goals for today are to start to think about your voice. And your voice is something that is very personal to each of us, yet we don't think of it very often in the landscape of, let's say, diversity. We have many, many people who we work with, and we think of diversity, we think of many aspects of diversity, but very seldomly do we think of voice or communication style as an aspect of diversity. And we're going to talk about some of that today. So one of the goals is that I want to keep you thinking about, is that there's no one voice of leadership. So we're going to start thinking about this. We're going to start thinking about that the voice of leadership is what we perceive it to be based on experiences, based on your own experiences, based on what you believe. And then it's up to us to increase our awareness to speaking styles and voices. So we must tune in and listen differently. And we're going to talk about that throughout the webinar today. All right, next. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is just introduce a little bit of this idea. We're going to talk about the elements of voice, leadership and voice, accents, culture, and perception, and what our brain does when it's listening to information it's not familiar with, or sounds or speaking patterns it's not familiar with, and then how mindfulness or how being in the moment can help us overcome some of this as we're tuning in. Okay, next. Okay, so I'm just going to ask you a true or false question. In your perception, the way people speak can impact our perception of them. Is that, for you, is that true or false? And just type it in the chat. And John is going to give me some of your feedback.
Yeah, Lisa, we're getting a pretty overwhelming response in true.
Okay. All right, so we're all in agreement here that the way we speak can impact our perception of someone. Now, this is very important for us to remember as we continue to continue this discussion. So can you, next. All right, so one of the things that is happening all over the world is that we're doing exactly what we're doing now. We're in a very digital landscape. We're also on the phone more. So at no other time, well, for a very long time, and for some of you who, are very young and you've only communicated on digital and you're not used to even being on a phone because you're texting, because I have younger clients that really never use the phone very much. I used to use it when I was younger a little more, but the AT&T has seen a 35% increase in phone calls. Verizon reported phone calls were also up 33%, the length of calls. So what this tells us is that we're using calls more, we're on digital more. Right now, I'm looking at you, but I can't see you. So, you know, we're interacting, and I'm trying to interact with you, but a lot of what we have when people turn their video off, when we're on calls, is how we sound. It's our voice. Our voice is becoming a big part of our brand. So why does this matter? And we're going to start to talk about that today. Next. So right now, when we're on calls, when we're engaging, there's algorithms that are analyzing us all the time. We're set up for job interviews. We could be talking to someone for a possible position, and the algorithm is trying to assess us to see if the sound of our voice is actually appropriate for that position. It could be sales, it could be HR. I want to know how you feel about this. How do you feel about, and it could be just positive or negative, because I know we're in chat. How do you feel about an algorithm assessing the sound of your voice? And do you think it's accurate? I guess you could type as much as you can, yes or no, positive or negative, something like that.
Yeah, Lisa, a lot of people are saying that they would rather that not be the case.
Mm-hmm. So I agree, and I think it's a very strange thing, but it is happening more and more. So I work with a lot of tech professionals, and voice analysis has become a big piece of what people are building into all different types of tools. And so again, our voices are becoming much more on the forefront than they ever were before. So this is a tool that we want to understand, but we also want to understand how we're tuning into voices and what we start to think about when we think about a voice. Next. All right, so the elements of voice. We'll go into next. Sorry, I have an itchy nose. All right, so why do we sound different? Why do men and women sound different? It basically comes down to physiology. Some of us are bigger. Men tend to have bigger bone structure, thicker vocal cords. We have different, so basically our bodies are used to vibrate sound. And sometimes if you have a bigger structure, it's going to sound different. It's going to sound deeper. A woman who is smaller might, or a man who is smaller boned might sound a little higher pitched. It could be social. You know, certain countries, it is much more appropriate to speak in higher pitches, especially for females. Females also have more tones in their voice because females speak at a higher pitch. If you look, a female will speak between 185 and 220 hertz. A male will speak between about 98 and 123. So it's a different range. It's a much lower range that men naturally speak at. So when you wonder about a woman and you say, oh, you know, a lot of women get criticized for, you know, if their voice gets too high, they sound too emotional, but it's because of where the range is and how many tones there are to access. Men tend to speak at a lower portion of their pitch range, but everybody puts pressure on themselves to speak at a deeper pitch range. Now, yes, there are times when it might not be appropriate to speak at a very high pitch range, but I think we have to think about what's realistic for ourselves. I have clients come in all the time, and one of the people they ask about is Morgan Freeman, who has a very unique speaking style. And he speaks at about 85 hertz. Now, if you look at males, he speaks quite below what an average male voice sounds like. And yet people will come in and think, oh, that's the voice. That's the voice I want. I want to sound something like this. So it just shows us how unrealistic we are when we perceive ourselves and how we're perceiving others. Next.
Lisa, we actually just have a quick question.
Sure.
Does the range vary between languages?
So I think that we all have this pitch range. We all have, you know, depending on if you're male or female, but some languages are spoken at higher pitches. We also have comfort levels. So sometimes if you're speaking in a first or a second language, I know that when I'm speaking in Italian, my voice actually goes up. I use a higher pitch. And it could be your comfort level. It could be your persona in that language. It could be how confident you are in that language. So I think there is a range. You're going to hear yourself differently in different languages. Plus, different languages resonate. So basically, where the sound is produced is going to happen differently in different languages. So French is going to happen a lot more. The sound is going to resonate a lot more in the back. You're going to have a lot more nasal sounds, a lot more in the front, because your mouth is going to be more closed. So the pitch is actually going to sound a little different as well, because of how you're using the physiology. And if you want to ask questions that I'm not answering for any reason, I'm going to share all my contact information with all of you, and you are welcome to email me and contact me with any questions. I'm happy to answer them. Okay, next. Another part of voice that we don't start to think, that we don't typically think about, is what happens when we age. So I've had clients tell me that as we're aging, our voice changes more and more. There are CEOs that are older and older because baby boomers are actually retiring much later than any other generation. And because people are used to commanding a room, their own self-perception changes as their voice changes. I don't want to be political right now, but when you think about Joe Biden right now, I think a lot of people have concerns about how he speaks. Now, Joe Biden was a former, well, not former, I think he is still a stutterer. So he has a fluency issue, and that actually impacts the way he speaks, I think, when he's nervous. But he is a man who's aging as well, and he's gotten some criticism on the sound of his voice. And that is a bias that has been ingrained in how we think, right? Women's voices tend to get a little lower as they age. Men's voices sometimes get higher as they age. And this is something that we have to be also aware of. Are we making those judgments about someone when we get on a phone? Are we thinking, okay, what's the perception I have when I'm listening to this voice? Is it making me think of something in particular when I hear the sound of this person's voice? And this is something that we want to, again, check ourselves on over and over again. Is it the sound of the voice, or is it the content that we're tuning into? And is it accurate? Are we giving this person a chance, or are we automatically shutting it down because we think, okay, this is not something I'm used to, as, let's say, the sound of leadership or the sound of what I'm used to in that role? Next. Okay, so I'm going to ask you this. What information can a voice communicate? Now, it could be gender, it could be age, anything, could be characteristics like confidence. But if you have some information for me, just type it into the chat. I will slow down. I'm trying to keep time, but John, what you have until about 11:50, right? Because we started a little later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So one of the big things that is coming in now is the gender.
Gender.
Gender, confidence, a smile over the phone, and comfort with the content.
So when you think about a voice or a speaking style, you also could get information about age. You have age. You also could get information about education levels, gender. We have many things that we start to think about. We start to think about where the person's from, their accent, their region. It could be so much information that's embedded in there. The person who said smile actually is correct. So when you smile, you change your voice. What happens is you physiologically raise your larynx because you're smiling, and it lifts your voice, it lightens up your voice. So people will tell you smile on the phone because it actually changes the sound of your voice. Sometimes people say to stand up if you're talking on the phone because it changes the sound of your voice. So the smile is correct as well. But you could hear positive, you could hear negative, you could hear boredom. There's so much information that we get just by tuning in to the sound of a voice and to a speaking style. Next. So we're going to talk a little bit about leadership. Now, when you think of the voice of leadership, and I'm going to ask you this, please type it into the chat. What do you think of? What kind of voice do you think of when you really think, that is a voice of leadership?
So we're getting some answers of people, and then deep, commanding, and then as far as people, I've gotten a couple Obama ones.
Yeah, everybody loves Obama, and he had a great voice. And you think about Obama's voice, it was very deep and very commanding, and he knew how to use his voice really well. Well, the world thinks this too, because men, and this is about men, with the deepest voices on the scale, they worked in companies. So leaders with the deepest voices on the scale, I'm going to have to read this, ran companies that had about 440 million more in assets, and they earned significantly more money. There is a correlation between the speaking style, the deeper the voice the CEOs had, and how long they stayed. And this is from Business Insider in 2013. So there were correlations in speaking style, that commanding presence that we think of when we think of leadership, how much money they make, how long they stay, what kind of company they're at. So it's there and it's real. Next. But what happens when you don't have that voice and you are still commanding and you're still super confident? Now, throughout this talk, what I want to make sure we focus on is that there is no one voice of leadership. We have, through our experiences, what we prefer, and we also have what we expect. But that doesn't mean that there's not a huge range of what leadership sounds like. And as the world becomes more diverse, gender diverse, global, because we're online, because we're doing this, any of us could be sitting anywhere, and we're going to be doing this more and more, unfortunately, because we're not going to be meeting as much right now, at least, and we're going to see and hear all of those different speaking styles coming from different language backgrounds, from different cultures. And so this is something we need to train ourselves to tune into, that deep voice definitely resonates, I think, throughout a lot of cultures. But, you know, what happens when it's not there? Are we tuning it out? And how are we checking ourselves? Margaret Thatcher is someone who is a great example of this. When she began her career, she was actually perceived as not having a powerful voice. So she received coaching from a man named Barney Ingram, and they were very concerned that she spoke in a high pitch. She was coached to speak in a lower pitch because she had to lead a nation, because she had to be believable. Now, that was a lot of pressure on her, but she had to learn this in order to be the face of England. Next. So going back to women's voices, and I think that this is something that we all want to think about, is, you know, women have particular pressure on them to have certain speaking styles. And I think many women come to me and they ask me, you know, can I have a deeper voice? Because I think my voice is too high when I listen to it. And what I tell people all the time is it's not that you want to have a speaking style that's below your range. You don't want to go so deep that it sounds fake, it doesn't sound authentic to you. We all have that range that we work in, and we have to access different parts of that range. The most successful speakers speak within a range. It's interesting to listen to them because they're accessing different notes. The voice is more open. And when we think of Obama, he used a variety of pitches and ranges. He did have a deeper style, but he was also very open. Young women, I think, are trying to emulate that. And what happens a lot of times is that they go into something called fry. And we all know what this is. We've heard it in the media. We've heard it with actors when people speak like this. So it's a speaking style where, you know, you're talking and you're in the lowest part of your pitch range. You tend to be squeezing on your voice. They call it fry because it sounds a little bit like frying bacon or frying something on a pan. And it's not the most pleasant sound, but men and women both do this, yet it's mostly associated with women, and it does impact the hiring process. Now, for this particular speaking style, it's also generational. If you talk to people in their 20s, they don't actually hear it as much. Now, I have clients come to me, especially young women. I'm coaching someone right now who has this style of speaking. And she was actually told, she just started a program where she's going to be a therapist, that it might be better for her if she could get out of that speaking style. And I do think that in order to access a variety of notes, you need to understand how you sound. But for a lot of males who also adapted this speaking style, they're not as heavily criticized. And usually the people who tune into it the most they tend to be over 40 because they're not used to that style. I guess if you're in your own social group and that's how everybody sounds, then it's not as big of a deal. So language and voice are living. They change. Our speaking styles change. And, you know, what's acceptable in one generation can change in another. When you think of those old Hollywood movies, and they had that very interesting intercontinental accent. It wasn't quite British. It wasn't quite American. It was in the movies in the 40s. I've seen some of them, and you don't really know what that accent is, but it's something they developed because that was an appropriate speaking style of the time, and that's what was thought of as very attractive. You know, that was what people wanted to have. So it is a living thing. It changes over time. What we think of as attractive, the voice of leadership, will change. For men and women, it will change. Next. So our speech perception can also be very cultural. You know, one of my clients and colleagues is from Germany, and she was saying that, you know, when she hears upspeak and vocal fry, and she's in her 30s, she thinks of it as not a sign of insecurity, like many times it's viewed in the US, or it's viewed as negative in the US, but she was thinking of it more as a sign of individualism, since in Germany, people tend to speak with a much more serious tone across the board and have a more similar speaking style. So when she hears it, she hears it and she thinks, oh, okay, so it's someone trying to be individualistic rather than, you know, what a lot of us view it as is, okay, that sounds like they're a little bored, they're a little detached. So again, it's perception. Not everybody's even perceiving things the same way. Next. Okay, so you gave me a few, and I would love to hear more. You said Obama. Can you think of examples of leaders that you admire? And just type it into the chat.
So, Lisa, we've gotten Anna Wintour, Elizabeth Warren,
Mm-hmm.
Hillary Clinton, Macron,
Mm-hmm.
uh, not Trump,
Not
and
Trump. I agree.
yeah.
Okay. Interestingly, I think this is great, and I love that we had a lot of female voices on there, which is amazing. Macron, because we have all different, very different speaking styles here. One of the reasons I think people do get turned off by Trump is because he has this speaking style where he's, and some people like it, oddly, but I mean, it works for a lot of people. It's very like being hit by a brick. He yells, he pushes, you know, it's a very overdone speaking style that works for his audience. And again, it's perception, but it's not my favorite speaking style. But again, it just goes to show you how it could actually rally a crowd depending on what their expectation is of what leadership sounds like. So when we put pressure on ourselves to say, okay, I need to sound like this, we all could work within our range to improve. I'm not saying that we can't. And many of my clients will tell me, you know what, I want to improve, I want to change this aspect of things, but again, we want to be realistic within our range. We also don't want to put undue pressure on ourselves or others to sound a certain way, to communicate a certain way, because we realize that there's so many speaking styles. All the people you just named sound very different. So, and they're all great leaders, and we admire their speaking styles because they have engagement, because they connect with us. So those are the things we're looking for as we're tuning in. Next. So here's a great example of someone, and unfortunately we can't play the video because I didn't send the link soon enough. So this is the case of Elizabeth Holmes, and I will invite you all to listen to her voice. She has a very interesting case. She is the founder of a company called Theranos, and some of you might have heard of her because it was quite famous. She developed a blood testing company, supposedly that could take a small drop of blood and do a huge sample based on this small drop of blood. She had raised, I think, 9 million in funding. She was, you know, big in Silicon Valley for a while. She had a lot of backers. One of the things she's very known for, and again, this is where I invite you to watch her, one of the videos, is she put on this voice that was so low and so deep. I mean, it actually sounded like this the whole time she was talking. And I mean, I wondered how people actually thought that was her real voice. based on her size, based on her gender, but she kept that voice, she kept it consistent, and she did it because she felt the need to go so low and so deep, to be that deep, to be commanding in the boys club of Silicon Valley. She felt like this is the way she had to do it. And the interesting thing is she was able to pull it off. She used this voice and people didn't seem to question it. So someone like her who felt the need, now she created also a false company. So you have to think of where this person's coming from. But someone like her had to go so different, had to go so extreme from who she is, her communication style. And when you think about that gap, when we think about, okay, we're pushing ourselves so far outside of, what we're made to do or who we are, that could wear on you after a while. So again, finding the place within your range, if you want to work on your speaking style, is great. We all have places to improve, but not necessarily going to a place where, we're beating ourselves up because we don't have a particular voice. Next. Okay, this is the link that you can watch at some point. Next. Okay. I had a particular client from Malaysia, and she's tiny. I mean, she's definitely a smaller statured woman who has a very high-pitched voice. And when she came to me, this is a perfect example of someone who was torn between two cultures. She came to me because she did have this high-pitched voice, and it did have almost like a childlike quality to it, where she felt like it was very hard for her to be taken seriously in corporate. She just, got her master's degree in organizational psych. She was leading teams. And so she really needed to understand her speaking style, but what she thought she needed to sound like and what she sounded like were two different things. How she originally developed this very high-pitched speaking style was because she came from a culture where women needed to be more demure, women needed to be a little quieter. So this is someone who immigrated here when she was younger. And in high school, she was taking on a more New York style of speaking. And her mom, who's from Malaysia, would say to her, you need to be more quiet. It's not appropriate. It's not appropriate for a female to sound this way. And now the culture of how her family was impacting this culture of where she was growing up. And she developed this very high-pitched voice. She was pulling back so much that she felt the need to go to this place and she couldn't get out of it. She was sort of stuck in this very high-pitched voice. So there's a lot of pressure on people to sound certain ways, and sometimes the results aren't always so positive. So it's again, her content, her delivery, the way she was able to organize information was great, but the believability, because of this high-pitched squeaky voice, changed. Next. So going back to what we said, there is no voice of leadership. Developing yourself within your range and understanding your style is important, but also understanding your own biases is very, very important. Thinking of what triggers you. What do you think of when you hear a certain speaking style? It could be an accent, it could be a voice, and what happens? Where do you go in your head? Do you think, okay, this is going to be hard to listen to, I'm not sure about this person, or are you taking time to listen to the content? Next. Next. So as we're all talking about this, and if we were live, I would ask you this question, but in every culture, we think about what is excellent communication. So when I sit down with my clients, that's the first question I ask them. I work with international people and I work on a variety of things. So I'm not going to say that I don't do this every day. I help people develop their voices. Sometimes if it's accent, I work on clarity and making sure people are clear, but people also define their own goals. And the first thing I say is, where you're from or what your beliefs are about excellent communication. And it varies all over the world. How Americans communicate works for some audiences and it does not work for others. It does not work for French audiences. It does not work for always many European audiences because of the volume we use. When people come to New York, especially, they think about the volume. And if I've met with some of you before, this is one of those things that I've mentioned in some of the other workshops is volume and energy and the way you speak, the speaking style here is very important for the audiences. It's very important for believability. You know, when I've sat in pitch contests with startups, you know, one of the comments that the investors will make is, okay, you need to pitch it with a little more enthusiasm, you know, make me believe you can sell this. But that doesn't always work. You know, I work with Eastern European founders, and when they come over, they're saying, okay, if I'm sitting here and smiling and sounding like this, no one's going to take me seriously because it's not serious. And this is where we have to start thinking, you know, everybody's speaking style is very different, and where you're from really impacts, and there's no right or wrong. It's the audience you're speaking to, and where you're from impacts the style you're speaking. So how are we tuning into that? Is confidence different from different parts of the world? And we want to think about these things as we're working on global teams. You know, when we're sitting on a team and we're sitting on a conference call right now, it's probably going to happen even more from, you know, Japan, China, India, France, the States. It's, you know, our speakers are all going to sound very, very different. And what happens on those calls? You know, where does the miscommunication happen? Does it happen? How easy is it to tune into certain speakers? Next. So one of my speakers from Russia actually said that, you know, when I was coaching her, she had a very softer presentation. And one of her beliefs and one of her big resistances was that she felt like speaking loudly. And when I say loudly, I don't mean yelling, but raising her volume was not feminine. So this is actually something that, again, is ingrained in us. There's certain beliefs we have about communication and why we communicate the way we do, and then what we believe about others. So when she would meet a woman who was overly boisterous or used a lot of volume, for her, that felt rude. You know, that was automatically what she went to, is that, you know, this person is much more rude. And when her interactions would happen with them, that was the first thing she was going in with, is her belief about their communication style. And again, this is a lot because these beliefs are ingrained in us from very early on. Next. So now we're going to talk a little bit about voices and accents. And there's one thing to remember, is that we all have an accent. And where we're from, whether it's different parts of the US or different countries, you know, it's part of who we are. It's part of our history. It shapes the way we communicate and speak. Whether it's a foreign accent or a regional accent, it's going to become a part of us. And John and I were actually just talking before we got on this call about Rhode Island, and how, you know, he's in Rhode Island right now and he hears accents there that are very strong and very specific to a region. And it's because of a certain age group, and it's because of a region. And it gives a lot of information about, you know, the people who grow up in that region, who immigrated there, how those accents began, or how those regional accents began. Next. So an interesting thing is, I grew up in New York City, and I grew up in a place in Queens where it was largely immigrant families that were from all over the world. My grandparents immigrated from the south of Italy, but on my block where I grew up, it was very normal for me to go into people's homes and hear different accents, eat different food. You know, people were from Poland, from Ireland, from Colombia, from Greece, and that was a normal growing up here. So I think people had a very good understanding, and this is what gave me my love actually for cultures and accents and languages, is because I was exposed to them all the time from so early on. So I loved it. I was curious about it. I wanted to learn more. But there is something common about a New York speaking style that a lot of people from outside of New York have a hard time with. And New Yorkers are notorious for being very fast, loud. They interrupt a lot. They can be very abrupt, and it's not always easy for people from outside of the culture, from different countries, or even from different states, to engage with New Yorkers without thinking they might be rude. Now, to a New Yorker, they think, okay, we're efficient, we're to the point, we're very direct, you're going to get what you get, you know, we're going to talk to you, and we're going to be very open because, you know, we have this view of, you know, growing up very internationally. But not everybody sees it this way. So let's say you have someone from, and now this is an example, someone from China who is very much used to waiting for that pause. in the conversation so that they can add in very politely, their information, their comments. And people from New York tend to talk through the pauses because they'll give you a brief pause. If nobody's speaking, they'll fill the moment. And a lot of the times it's because they're uncomfortable with silences, and they'll just feel like that's a polite thing to do. Not even polite, but that's what you do, is fill the pause. When I was talking to someone on a recent webinar from Ohio, which is right here in the US, they did not like when the US team would come because she felt the same way. She felt they were rude. She felt they talked too much. They were overbearing. So their communication style, their volume, the way they spoke, she didn't want to work with them right away. Now, she did admit that after she got to know them and after she became familiar with the style, it became easier. But culture plays a huge impact in how we engage. And it also, again, affects our voice, it affects our accent, it affects the way we deliver. Next. So our brains are tricky. They're wired in a way where when we first hear a speech pattern that we're not used to, so we could get on a call and maybe it's an accent we're not familiar with, or it's a musicality or a cadence we're not familiar with, our brains don't want to work that hard. And sometimes they'll check out. The more familiar we are, and I think everybody on this call probably knows this because you do tend to work more globally, the more familiar you are with that person, with that accent, with that speaking style, the easier it is to understand. But in the beginning, it's very easy to check out. It's very easy for a hiring manager who has to make a split-second decision to get on a call with a new student who's graduating their MBA and they happen to be from China. Maybe they have a speaking style that's a little harder to understand in the beginning, and say, okay, no. And that's when we go back to those algorithms. And an algorithm is just going to make that quick judgment. A person can become aware, okay, maybe this is a bias, maybe I need to listen past this. Now, if it's someone who's going to engage on the phone and it's a very forward-facing position where they're client-facing, yeah, if you want to think about these things, it's important. But the truth is, many times it's exposure. So the more you hear different speaking styles, the more different speaking styles you're going to understand. You're going to relate them with each other. The more you're listening to French accents, you're probably going to understand more Italian accents and Spanish accents, and you're going to recognize similarities and be able to tune in faster. So as we become more global and as we're listening to different speaking styles on conference calls, tuning in and really listening past those moments is very important. Knowing that, okay, we're going to get on the phone with this person and it's the first couple times we speak with them, is it triggering something for us? Are we thinking, okay, so I don't love doing business with this person. It's very hard. They're very rude. I'm not sure what they said. Or are you really checking yourself and giving yourself that challenge to tune in? Because sometimes it's not so easy, but it's up to us as we become more global to keep doing this. And as leaders, we have to train our teams to do this as well. Next. So this is a quote that I read from an article that this woman wrote. Her name is Alexandra, and she is from Italy. Now, she was born and raised in Rome, so her native language is Italian, obviously, and she lives in the US. And what she said was that when she hears English spoken in other accents, very strong accents, sometimes accents from different parts of the world, different parts of the US, she has a hard time understanding them. But when she hears English with a very strong Italian accent, now it's not Italian, it's English with an Italian accent, she understands everything they say. And a lot of that is, again, because of the brain, right? Her brain is used to how she tunes into that sound. It's very used to those patterns, those rhythms, the sounds. So she's able to understand much easier than maybe someone from China or Colombia, because she is used to that speaking style. So it's a very interesting article, actually, and I'll share with you the link. But she talks about her experiences with communication and why the brain does what it does. And again, our brains do this because it wants to save us some work. So now we have to get past this and start to tune in a little bit differently. Okay, next. We also have influences from childhood. So from when we're very young, we hear accents in movies, we hear speaking styles in movies, and we associate them with different things depending on where we come from. One of the things that I was researching is the speaking styles in Disney films. And one of the things that came up was that British English is used in Disney films over and over again to either depict the smartest person in the room, like the professor, or someone who is, the brilliant person, or the evil villain. So one of those things is going to happen with the British accent. And I think Americans will attest to this, especially on the intelligence scale. If you think about a British person and American accent, the Americans will actually rate the British accent as much more intelligent. Now, people who have not had as much exposure to British accents will have a much harder time understanding them. I was working with someone recently from Brazil who, she recently immigrated. She grew up in a smaller city. The majority of her interaction with English was through movies. Movies tend to be from Hollywood. So the American accent was what she was exposed to and what she understands most. When she interacts with her British colleagues, she says that she can't understand them very well. So because she's not used to the accent, it automatically for her becomes a little more difficult. And she'll say, oh no, I don't like, interacting. It's much too hard. It's a very different speaking style. And it's very interesting because, again, it's perception. Next. So when you think about movies, and if you think about movies in your childhood, you might have seen what accents characters might have had. And you don't even need to answer this, but start to think about, are there certain accents in the movies that you've seen, could be regional, could be from different countries, that you associated with certain types of characters, whether it's the villain or the professor, or in a James Bond film. Those are great because they're full of accents, and and in James Bond films, it tends to be the villains had very different types of accents. So it's ingrained in us. It's something that's taught, and it develops a bias. Next. Okay, move to the next one. All right, so as we know, bias can be unconscious or it can be conscious. And it's something that it could be developed in us through our own experiences. Everybody has different experiences with this. What one person thinks is brilliant is another person is going to think of as boring, or maybe even counterproductive. Next. So one of the things I encourage all of us to do, and to train our leaders to do, is to practice listening, really listening to different speaking styles, and understand what might be a trigger for you. If you get on a call and automatically you're thinking, regardless of it's a voice or an accent, I want you to start to think about it and note it, and really think, is it the speaking style, or is it the content? Is it the person? What is it that is tripping me up here? And start to think about it in your own daily life, whether it's someone you think is very abrasive and you're like, okay, sometimes it is that it's the person and we don't want to do business with them because of very particular reasons, but we want to make sure it's not in the immediate first few interactions. Now, not over the long term, but let's say the first time or second time you meet someone, is it something else? Is there something in us that's getting triggered, and what is it? Next. So one way to do this, and it's just to start breaking a habit, is you could use your phone. Your phone is with you all the time. And let's say you say, okay, today I'm going to get on a call and I'm going to really start to note, do I have a negative or positive feeling? Maybe it's the first time I'm talking to this person about their speaking style. Does anything come up? And if it does, what was it? Was I distracted from the content in any way? So as I was speaking to this person, did this distract me? What happened? And if negative feelings occurred, try to release them, try to move past it. And again, maybe once or twice, if you're on a new call with a new person, you could do this during a week and just see, is there something in there that triggers you? And maybe there's not. Maybe you're someone who's very global and you're very used to this. It could be someone who is working in a company that you're used to one particular communication style. So, when you add new ones to the mix, it might be a little more difficult. But really noticing how the people you work with, how you engage, and how people work with each other through speaking styles is going to be important as we continue to work on these platforms, because this is it. We have our voices. Next. Okay, so this is the last thing I will ask you to do, and we're coming to the end of our time, is think about what you can do to change the bias of voice related to leadership and culture. And, you know, you could share it in the chat, or you could email me. You can come up with ideas. And again, if we were live, I would start a discussion about this because I'd like to hear your take on it. I know that you all work with many multinational companies. You've worked in several countries. So I think a lot of you are probably very good at this, but there's a lot of people who aren't. And, how do we help people tune in better and work more globally? Because again, we're going to be doing it more and more, and it's a beautiful, amazing thing that we are, but we want to help each other open up that, okay, this is not the one voice of leadership, that male, female, people from all over the world have this voice of leadership. It sounds different in different places. And how do we embrace that? How do we open it up so we really give people a chance? Next. All right, so to go back to what we said, there's no one voice of leadership, and it is really based on our own experiences, what we think that is. And we want to increase awareness and inspire understanding and change in our own habits. Okay, so this is going to wrap up our presentation, and I hope you took away a few little tidbits from this. If you want to continue this conversation, I love talking about this, and there's a lot more to say, but today was just a little teaser. So if you're interested in learning about your voice, if you're interested in just about talking about this, if you want to share information with me because you agreed or disagreed, and that's okay, I want to hear it because I love feedback, and I want to know how to make this better because you are very global and maybe there's something I missed. So please share that with me. So John is going to share my contact information. I believe you're going to also share the deck, right? So this is all my contact information. If you want to link in with me, if you want to tell me you loved it or hated it, I want to know, because I want to know what you think. So please link in or explain to me what you thought so I could make this even more powerful for people who need it. So thank you very much. And I hope to actually see you and meet you sometime in the future.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Really appreciate it. Of course, I just want to, thank the audience for coming and
yes,
asking so many different questions and giving so many different answers on the different leaders and qualities. Really appreciate it. Lisa, thank you so much for such an interesting and fun little webinar. Really appreciate it. Again, yes, the recording, the slide, all the videos, the contact information will all be shared to attendees and registrants, so don't worry about missing a thing. Lisa, thank you so much one more time, and looking forward to seeing everybody at our next digital event. Thank you so much and have a great weekend.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.